Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Carol Bornstein. I'm on the board of the SoCal Hort Society, and I am delighted to be introducing a very dear friend of mine to you this evening, Richard Hayden. We have known each other since college days. I won't tell you how long ago that was. We actually even worked together for several years at the Natural History Museum when I was hired there to be the director of the nature gardens, the brand new nature gardens. Richard was the very first person that I hired to be the head gardener, and he did an extraordinarily wonderful job overseeing the day-to-day operations of the nature gardens. And eventually, he was asked to become the assistant deputy director to oversee the master planning process for the Brea Tar Pits Museum. And he did that for quite some time while simultaneously taking on the responsibilities of overseeing all of the nature garden operations, the horticulture, collaborating with the education staff, as well as the research scientists. So he had quite a full plate back then. Eventually, however, the lure of the High Line, the wonderful gardens at the High Line, and New York City, which he had lived in once before, took him away from Los Angeles and California to take on the job that he has now. And I should also mention that before coming to the nature gardens at the Natural History Museum, he had a very successful career as a landscape designer for over 20 years. So very well steeped in all manner of horticulture and garden design and care in the Mediterranean climate of California. And then across the country to take on the many challenges associated with tending the gardens at the High Line. And I really look forward to hearing his presentation, and I know you will enjoy it. So, Richard, it's all yours.
We actually worked together twice, Carol, because we met working together at the Leopold Bloom's restaurant in Ann Arbor, Michigan, when we were just wee folks in college. And here we are all these years later. It is so exciting to be back with SoCal Hort, an organization that I used to belong to and used to love to go to meetings of. And I have to say, I do miss my Southern California climate. Um, but we're going to take a little trip on the East Coast, and I'm going to share my screen. So tonight, I thought we would take a little trip. We're going to learn a little bit about the High Line history just because I think it's so fascinating. Um, hear about the design process that brought the High Line to life, how the High Line has actually evolved over the course of the 16 years since it first opened in 2009, and kind of fascinating, but how we actually take care of the High Line. It is a dynamic naturalistic landscape, and there are some special tricks we use. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then, of course, we do some excellent programming. I was really fortunate to work at the Natural History Museum and learn a lot about horticultural programming and education from a great team there. And from Carol, thank you for hiring me, by the way. And of course, we have a lot of ecological benefits on the High Line. And then, of course, Piet Oudolf is our garden designer. The High Line is probably his most famous work. And so we'll talk a little bit about Piet and what a joy it is to work with him. So let's get started. I've got a lot of great photos to get through. So here we go. So the High Line actually came about because there was a real issue with trains on the west side of Manhattan. It was a juggernaut of an industry, basically between 30th down to Spring Street, about 3 miles of where these warehouses were located. You can see the trains actually ran right down the center of 10th Avenue from about 1850 to when the High Line opened in 1930. And there were just a tremendous amount of accidents. About 400 people over the course of that time lost their lives. And so the 10th Avenue actually became known as Death Avenue. And they even put these cowboys in front of the trains trying to warn people away, but they moved so slowly that often children would get injured. And so there was a lot of outcry. They developed this idea of building this amazing piece of infrastructure that opened in 1934, ran for about 2.5 miles, 30 feet in the air, two freight trains passing side by side. and often going right underneath the buildings where they were delivering goods to. And that worked great until about 1980 when manufacturing was lessening, trucks were way more efficient, and the last train of the High Line ran in 1981. It was a boxload of frozen turkeys at Thanksgiving. And we all know that nature abhors a vacuum. So, for the next 20 years, there was nothing going on. This is the High Line about what it covers now. All the way up at the right upper right side is 34th Street, all the way down to Gansevoort, which is roughly about 10th Street. So the High Line, the railroad ties disintegrated, soil formed, birds brought in some seeds, they blew in, and this magic garden kind of just appeared. But nobody knew it was really there because it was 30 feet in the air, unless you were fortunate enough, and there were not a lot of residential buildings along the High Line. These two gentlemen met at a community board meeting. They sat next to each other serendipitously, and it came up that Giuliani administration had torn down the first southern mile of the High Line and wanted to actually demolish the rest of it. It was very expensive to actually tear down. And these two met and thought it might be a good idea to create a park, to create some sort of a green space in this part of Manhattan that really needed green space because there wasn't a lot over here. And they were really smart. The first thing they did is they hired this photographer named Joel Sternfeld, who took his big wide angle, kind of get under the cloak camera up to the High Line over the course of an entire year in 4 seasons. And he shot these just amazingly evocative photographs. And then they would blow these up and they would take them to community meetings to get people excited and to show them really, how beautiful it was, what an interesting take on the city it was, and just the idea that this could be this fabulous park. And so they were, through a series of synchronous opportunities, they got someone in the Bloomberg administration who was very interested in the project, and they were able to kind of get off the ground. And they did this really smart thing. They did a lot of community board meetings, a lot of public outreach to find out. And one of the things they did was they had this card that they would pass out and ask people to kind of fill out what they thought the High Line could be. And they got this card. And it really took them aback, but it made them realize that they really should pay attention to the idea of it being a wild space, of it being a wilderness. And so the next phase of it was to actually create a design, and this is how they really got a lot of publicity around it. They opened it up worldwide. Any idea was willing to consider. They got 720 entries, and this is one of my favorites. To turn it into a 1.5 mile long lap pool. There was another one that thought it should be a roller coaster. And there were just a lot of these kind of crazy ideas. And it was actually exhibited in Grand Central Station. So it got really a lot of public buzz. I think it was even in the New Yorker at one point. And then they got serious and they offered 4 different design groups the opportunity to bid and to make presentations on what the park could become. And they went with field operations, Diller, Scofidio, and Renfro architects, and they were smart and hired this nurseryman from the Netherlands named Piet Oudolf. And it's amazing how the renderings, the original renderings that field operations, as the project leads, kind of suggested for the project, they're so very close to what actually has gotten built. You can see here, this is the southern end of Gansevoort. There's the rendering again. And so, they just really had this interesting take on it. And here they are doing their first site visit, the design group. That's Jim Corner, project lead, in his black suit and briefcase, which looks like maybe not the right attire for this particular day. You get a sense of just, there was some cleanup to do. Also, the soil was completely contaminated, so everything had to be removed. There was asbestos in the brakes. There was lead paint. Here's Jim. Keep track of that sumac tree that's behind him because that will come to play a little bit later. you get a sense. We did do a survey of the plants that were up there. I think there were 401 species, and 51% of them were native, and a few of them have made it into the final highline. But they came up with the idea of having basically these four guiding principles: keep it simple, keep it wild, keep it quiet, and keep it slow. The idea would be that it would be a respite from the city and just this opportunity to kind of get this completely otherworldly nature experience. And here's Pete planting the Chelsea Garden section. He was brought on in 2004. He had done the Lurie Garden in Chicago at this point, which maybe some of you have been to, and also a small garden at the Battery in New York, but was pretty well unknown at this point. But he is just a master at combining plants, at working with perennials and grasses, and creating naturalistic gardens. And so, you know, this is Pete's own garden in Humelo. I had a good fortune of visiting a couple of years ago, and spending time with him in the garden it was just like a pinch me moment. I thought I was going for an hour-long tour and to a bite of lunch, and he kept me for 7 hours and took me into his studio and showed me videos about his designs and his databases. It was just amazing. Um, but I think probably the biggest component that Pete has introduced is the idea that um, gardens are four season, that people should be trained to see the beauty in decay. And I know that Carol Bornstein has often said that brown is the color too when talking about California gardens in the summer. So we kind of really made popular the idea of the four-season garden, and that you should choose plants for their texture, for their flower color, for their fall color, and also for their winter seed structure. He calls them skeletons. So this just gives you a little sense of, this is the Northern Spur Preserve section, which is Pete's kind of homage to the original self-seeded landscape. And you just get a sense of the seasonality, the bulbs, the early color, the fall color, the winter interest. And the episodic experience that they wanted to create, which was a great idea because it's a 1.5 mile long garden. You can't just do the same kind of planting scheme the whole way. And it's only, the highline is 40 to 50 feet wide. The pathway in the first section was about 8 feet, which sometimes doubles up, but it was pretty skinny. So they had the idea to kind of turn the garden into an episodic journey, a naturalistic journey. And how could they make it different? They chose the idea of using ecological habitats as a way of kind of giving into different styles of garden. And those four are woodland, woodland edge, wetland, and grasslands. And they chose what they would put where based on the way the highline felt. Now, it doesn't feel the same way now because there's been considerable construction, but grasslands were often put in areas that were wide and open, and there could be wind and things like that. Woodland edge where there was buildings and shades, woodlands where there was even more shade generally. So here they are. You can see there was just a tremendous amount of plants that went in with Pete's matrix style, which is the idea that you have a series of just a couple of different species that you're repeating as ground covers, and then the other perennials are planted into those, emerging up into them. And it just does a great job of covering the ground. It keeps the weeds down, and it makes the landscape appear very naturalistic, because we all know that nature in her own right plants very densely. So let's take a little tour up the High Line. We're starting at the very southern end down here at the Gansevoort Woodland, and we call this our front porch. Our headquarters building is down here. And it's a gray birch woodland. And the High Line is really known for, basically what you're seeing here, by the way, is 18 inches of soil. Everything was taken up, remediated, a new concrete, shallow swimming pool, if you will, 18 inches deep was poured. Constructed soil was brought in. The railroad ties were numbered, removed, and then put back close to where they were. We made some adjustments. So that's what you see running through the beds there. But there's also just this complexity of planting. Here's a winter scene. It is the overarching birches that create a kind of a cathedral feeling. And then there is the understory of red buds and dogwoods. And we have amelanchiers, service berries in this area. And then we have this really lush ground cover layer. And keeping all of that happy in 18 inches of soil, 30 feet in the air is the magic that I'm excited to say my team of 11 full-time horticulturists really pull off beautifully. You can see what it's like in the winter. You get this incredible sculptural quality to it. And that's the Gansevoort woodland. And then when you leave the Gansevoort woodland, you come out of that beautiful archway of birch trees into a more open Washington grasslands. And here it is just shortly after it was planted. Heavy on grasses. There's a lot of schizocarium here on the left, little blue stem. Um, and you can see it kind of maturing. I think these two pictures are probably about 10 years apart. The one on the right, the perennials have really taken over. And Pete has these, he was introduced to prairie plants early on when he was working in the Lurie garden. Um, and so you can see just the beauty that he's learned to combine with some of these wonderful prairie plants, the blazing star and the echinacea. And just a view, this is the red leaf is a fabulous, it's called Grace cotinus or smokebush. It's a cross between our native Cotinus obovata and the European Cagrigria. I can never say that species, but it's a really wonderful plant. And then here's a little fall season. We do have an art program. They do plunk art down in the middle of the beds, and so that's what you're seeing there. And that changes every year depending on where they're located. So there are sculptures throughout the park. But you can start to see some of the winter interest down in the lower corner kind of filling in. And then that fuzzy plant there is a wonderful, wonderful perennial from Arkansas and Oklahoma called threadleaf blue star, Amsonia hubrechtii. It's just a great peat plant. Going a little further north, we get to the woodland edge, and this is literally woodland edge. Part shade, it's kind of a shrub thicket, if you will. There's Prunus virginiana in here. And Pete just is really at his masterful texture best at this garden. You can see there's not really a lot blooming, but there's just a tremendous amount of interest. Further north, through the 14th Street Passage, we get up to the Diller von Furstenberg Sundeck. And yes, Barry Diller and Dion von Furstenberg were some early supporters and gave us some money. They have this area that's labeled after them. And these chaise lounges are very popular in the summertime, you can imagine, but that's early. A little bit later, you can see what we're looking like in the summer a few years later. We have this wonderful water feature that is just a sheet of water that comes over the walkway. And it cools off a lot of hot tourist feet in the summertime, and little kids love to play in that as well. And then here's the sumacs. This garden has 3 different species of sumac. And I don't think at the time that they were planting the highline, anybody was really using sumac as an ornamental plant. It's a great plant. It has great texture. It has great fall color. It has seed heads that are really interesting. And so we have really enjoyed the beautiful, beautiful sumacs in this garden. And then there's also a wetland garden here. So on the right-hand side, that little skinny bed that we're seeing on the right side of the water feature there, is actually a wetland bed. And it is planted with New York State native wetland plants. And the idea would be that you could squint your eyes as you looked at the wetland bed and you could see the Hudson River over there and pretend that these would be the plants that were growing along the Hudson River. But 15 years on, when I started, the wetland bed had been planted with equisetum. And I don't know if you all are familiar with equisetum or horsetail reed, but it is very aggressive. And it had completely taken over the entire bed. So we also kind of felt like 15 years on, the soil could use a refresh. So last year, or I guess 2024, we took all the soil out, brought in fresh soil, which I can tell you is 30 feet in the air, was a lot of craning. But we got a new plant scheme going in the wetland, and it's a little lower, so we're maintaining the views through to the highland, to the Hudson. And it's just been a really nice opportunity to get a complete refresh of this garden. And then down below that is an area we call the Hudson Overlook, which is kind of a shrub thicket of sumacs and different prairie perennials. You can see here on the left, the wetland bed on your right, the Hudson Overlook on the left. And sumacs don't live that long. So we've been taking out some of the ones that are probably 18 years old or so now, and you just cut them down, and then they refresh with this beautiful new foliage, and it just gives you a new kind of feeling. And then we'll select out a few of these as we get going. So further north from that, you pass through this red building on the right, and that is formerly known as the National Biscuit Company. You might know it better as Nabisco. And this was the factory where they made Oreo cookies. And so trains would come in and drop off cocoa and flour and milk and all the things you needed for cookies. And then the cookies would get put on a train and taken out to the rest of the country. Um, and so this garden we kind of think of this as a woodland edge. It has a different kind of feeling. There's this beautiful purple milkweed planted here, which is kind of a rare plant in New York State. And we love our milkweeds. We have, I think, 5 different species on the High Line. But I just wanted to highlight this because it shows the way that Piet can really think about multiple seasons for a plant. On the left, you can see the blooms. On the right, you can see these really sexy, sinuous seed pods, which also get this kind of bronzy purple color as they age, and it's a perfect kind of color echo with the fading Joe Pye weed and the echinacea, and even the New York ironweed in the background. Here we are in July on the left. Those big tall grasses are called Molinia transparent. On the right, you can see the garden starting to age, and it still takes on a really wonderful interest, even though the flowers are fading. And then here's that Northern Spur Preserve again. Really a lesson in drifts and textures. Really a beautiful fall garden. There used to be a refrigerated building that this spur went into. So where that kind of block brick is at the very end, you can imagine a railroad car pulling in there and dropping off things that needed refrigeration. And then further north, we get to a new section of the Highland that we call the Oak Grove. And when I started in 2022, it looked like this. The oaks are bur oak trees, Quercus macrocarpa, and they are 30 feet tall. Who would think that you could grow oak trees in the middle of Manhattan, 30 feet in the air and 18 inches of soil that were 30 feet tall? But because the trees had gotten so tall, and because these buildings had been built and just completed shortly before I started in 2022, there was way too much shade. And this original Chelsea grassland, or oak savanna, if you will, just was failing because there wasn't enough sun. So with Piet's help, we replanted this as a woodland. And then the Chelsea grassland is probably the most iconic section. A lot of photographs have been taken. There's a little walkway at one point where there's a really great view that gives you this shot. So I have this particular view in multiple seasons and multiple years, so it's really handy. But this just gives you a sense of how it changes just through the season. You can see on the left we've got bulbs, miniature narcissus and species tulips. On the right, the Aramaris foxtail lilies are blooming a little bit later in the summer. Early June and mid-July is just even that much different. It's hard to believe. You can see the buildings are popping up. And then this is the reverse shot. This is kind of looking north, and it just gives you an idea of what the fall is like in this section. And then, of course, winter. And that building, that big tall building you're seeing at the very distance there, has just gone up. That's called One High Line. And there's a new section garden there that we'll hear about in a little bit that Piet has helped us up with. And so we're still heading north, and we get to what's called the Chelsea Thicket. This is where that Mahonia is growing. And it's really more of a woodland at this point. The trees have gotten quite large. There's red buds and Japanese snowballs. And there are some beautiful hamamelis. This is one called Jelena. It's a European cross variety, and it just gives you this really gorgeous and long bloom. And on a warm winter day, you get that wonderful kind of witch hazel smell. So there is a lawn at the High Line, and I'm not a big believer in lawns, but if you're going to use them for recreation, and there's not a lot of spots to get off the main path at the High Line, it's nice to have them. But when I started, the lawn had been removed and seeded in as a prairie with 36 different species of prairie seeds. Um, what had happened is that during COVID, there was a 5-month period when no one was allowed on the High Line to do any maintenance. And so the lawn had grown long and kind of gotten sparse. And so they made a decision to take it out and seed. So, of course, these early pioneer, easy to grow, annual, biennial Rudbeckia put on quite a show, but there were so many weeds. There was just so many weeds, and we had no course but to just try to mow to keep the annual weeds down. So um, Piet Oudolf came for his first visit in June of 22, just about what would that be, 2.5 months after I started. And I said, Pete, I'm so embarrassed. Everybody thinks you designed everything on the High Line, and then here we have this garden of that was very, very weedy. Um, and and isn't that a magnificent cotinus? That's our native cotinus, Cotinus obovata. That particular one was taken out just 2 weeks ago. There were 5 originally in here, and they all succumbed to verticillium, but it's such a beautiful plant. So we made the decision to put the lawn back, and it was not inexpensive. Everything on the High Line, because the logistics gets very expensive. But when you see the school, the preschool groups that come and do story time on the lawn, you remember why it's there. And so, and of course, we take care of it completely organic. Everything at the High Line is completely organic. We don't use any artificial fertilizers. All of our tools are electric. So we do a pretty good job with lawn care. And trust me, it does get, loved to death. We get on average about 6.5 million visitors every year. So moving north, the next garden you encounter is this meadow walk, which is just another grassland. You get a sense of it here. The grass on the right is really kind of beautiful plumed. It's Korean feather reed grass, Calamagrostis brachytricha. But that period during COVID when there was no one taking care of the garden, it is a prolific reseeder. And it was originally about 15% of the mix of this particular garden. So 15% of it was, and probably by the time I started, it was 85% of the mix. So, and we've learned recently that the Chicago Botanic Garden has placed this grass on the invasive list. So we've gotten it kind of pulled back and back to a much better balance for the garden. Allende, who takes care of this section, has really worked on this. But the next thing we have to decide is what to do with that invasive grass. And I'm not really worried about it escaping into wildlands from where it's located in Los Angeles or in the west side of Manhattan. But I just don't think we should be messaging that this is a beautiful grass, but it's just potentially an invasive problem. So I think in the next year, as we get things kind of under control, we'll think about replacing it. So heading north from the Meadow Walk, you come to this flyover, and this is a section you can see on the right, which was really kind of a canyon, if you will, between these 2 old existing buildings. And this was a spot on the High Line where trees were growing. And they were ailanthus trees, tree of heaven, also invasive, also a host to one of our pests, which is the spotted lanternfly, which hopefully you all don't have. But anyway, because the trees were here, they made this decision, wouldn't it be fun to put in this elevated canopy walk? And they planted it with sassafras, 3 different varieties of magnolia, and it's just been a wonderland. Pete was amazed when he was here recently in June. Actually, it was September, and he was saying we just had no idea that we would get 30 feet tall trees in this area. And in addition to the tall trees, we also have this incredible mosaic of ground covers, which is just keeping this alive. And we do a lot of tree trimming just to keep everything laced out. And here the sassafras are in their incredible fall color. And then another grassland occurs, and this is the wildflower field from 27th to 30th Streets. And you can see a lot of these tall buildings were not there when the High Line was first planted. The High Line has spurred kind of the development of this area. That was the reason it was greenlit by the city in many, many situations. But one could argue that it kind of overjuiced the development, and it's become a very expensive place to live. But this grassland also has a completely different feeling, and Pete uses different plants to kind of pull that together. Um, it has quite a few echinacea in it. It also has a really incredible fall color. Lots of, this is Solidaga speciosa, a late blooming goldenrod, lots of asters. And of course, we know that late blooming asters and goldenrods are really good for our bumblebees. And then we get up to 30th Street, and this is where the High Lines kind of tees off and it goes east-west at 30th Street. And so we called this area the Crossroads. And this is a slightly wonky picture. I pulled this off of Google Maps, but I didn't have a picture of what this looked like before the development. So this is about 2016. Keep your eye on that glass elevator box because this is what it looks like now. And there's the glass elevator on the right. This is Hudson Yards we're looking at up here. A couple of those buildings are in the top 10 tallest buildings in the country. Um, and what's happened is that all this residential buildings as well have just really stolen the light from this garden and also created some really challenging wind structures. So we have a lot of wind up here. If you go east from the crossroads, you come to this area that we call the tilt or the spur. This is based on a northeast woodland. There's 4 feet of soil here. It's quite a luxury, so they put in quite a few trees. There's Nyssa trees and Celtis and some liquid ambers. And then there's a big plinth spur area here. This is kind of a big plaza. And we do have this art program that goes in here. Right now on the right is called Dinosaur. It's a pigeon. And that's going away and getting replaced by a Buddha. And previously there was this beautiful, what's called old tree. And I loved the tree. It was just 25 or 30 feet tall. You could see it from many, many spots in the city. And trees were such a great thing because we could really do some programming that kind of overarched the whole idea between art and horticulture. And then we have this brand new section that this opened a couple years ago. It's brand new construction. It's not the original Highline rail yard line, but they built this kind of L-shaped. You can kind of see in the distance there, there's a timber kind of bridge, and you make a left on the timber bridge and it takes you over to the plaza at Manhattan West, and then you can just literally just go down the slope there, cross 9th Avenue, and you're at the Moynihan Penn Station train station. So this allowed people to actually not be at street level, and they can go 25 blocks walking, commuting, if you will, without having to go down to street level. And this is and underneath all of this is the entrance to the Lincoln Tunnel. So it's really no place you want to be at street level. And this is all based on Northeast woodland planting. One of the things we're dealing with, and I should mention that this was not a Piet Oudolf design. This was designed by the folks at Field Operations. And here we are 2 years later, but I've got these situations where I just don't have room for everything. And so I'm at the point where I'm having to make decisions about how do we trim the trees, what do we take out? And they were quite big trees going in, so they're not really something that are easily moved at this point. So if we head west from the crossroads towards the Hudson River, we would come to the Eastern Rail Track Walk, and the one thing you might notice up here, this was the third phase of the High Line that opened. So this opened a little later than the first two. When they first built the High Line, they were thinking they would get about 300,000 visitors annually. And that first year they did 1.3 million. And so they learned very quickly that they probably needed more pathways. So that's why you'll see up here, there's multiple pathways, which is great for people, but not so good for plants because it means that I have less soil depth. And the way they make this rail track exposed is by taking the soil level down. So there's just 12 inches of soil in these beds. And we've done quite well with putting in some aspens, which are probably accustomed to growing on the side of mountains in the wind. And so I think this is the second or third tree they've tried up here. So a really challenging spot to get things going. We have these beautiful woodicea trees which was the second tree that we tried here. The first one was a Kentucky coffee tree that just didn't make it. The 11th Avenue bridge bed, which is kind of a prairie planting with these baptisia, goldenrods. There's a little area for kids where they just basically took the decking away and put rubber around the beams, the Pershing square beams. Planted with soft plants, of course, and also plants that don't really attract bees so that we can make it safe for the kids to play. And then this last section of the High Line, which was called the interim walkway for many years, and then it was called the Western Rail Yards. And it is, you can see the rail yards on the right where the trains are all coming in from Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Um, but this is still the self-seeded landscape. The money was never raised to remediate the soil and to do everything that needed to happen. So they wanted people to have access to it. They just literally paved this what they called the interim walkway. And it was an aggregate walkway that basically over the course of 5 or 6 years has disintegrated. So this is getting replenished, brand new walkway, and we'll be still keeping it as the self-seeded landscape. And the interesting thing is that just by putting the walkway in, they changed the habitat for the plants because rain that falls on the walkway sheets off. And so the bed, the 30 inches along the walkway is getting twice as much water as it used to. And so now we have a lot more trees that are popping up. So it's been really interesting to watch how this goes. And then this little blue stem grass has really kind of sprouted up and given us a nice look. There's a lot of other little sprouts here, which I'll tell you are probably invasive oriental bittersweet. And because we don't use herbicides and we can't really work this soil because it's contaminated, we just do a lot of chopping off of flowers and fruits and try to manage things the best we can that way. But this section has really beautiful views of the Hudson. And it's nice to get over here. We're looking forward to having a new walkway next spring. So let me talk a little bit about how we curate the dynamic landscape of the High Line. We were really honored to be chosen by the New York Times Style magazine as one of the 25 must-see gardens of the world. They did that last year, and we did an article for the Times in the garden section talking about how we care for the garden because, as Margaret Roach, the garden columnist, told us, they get a lot of requests for everyone's embracing naturalistic gardens and meadows and replacing their lawns, but really, how do you take care of that kind of a dynamic landscape? And so, of course, we all know naturalistic gardens don't just grow this way. One of the biggest compliments we get is, oh, you're so lucky. It's so naturalistic. It just must grow this way. And it just means that we're like a swan gliding across the lake. And underneath those little feet are just moving so quickly. We're just doing we have 11 full-time horticulturalists taking care of what is basically just under 4 acres of garden. But we do a lot of, as I mentioned, tree care. Here we are in the summer of 22 when there hadn't been a lot of work done. We decided to have a really talented tree shaping crew come in. They spent 13 days on the High Line. That was a chunk of change, I can tell you. But eventually we ended up with this. And they're coming back. I just walked with them yesterday. They come every 2 years. And they have to do just a tremendous amount of lacing just to keep the light on the understory. But it's seamless. You can't really tell the work has been done. We also do something called the Chelsea Chop, and that is something that occurs at around the time of the Chelsea Flower Show in late May. A lot of our asters, goldenrods, coreopsis, vernonias, they need tipping or otherwise they become lanky and too tall and they tip over. And some of these, many of the asters, we will tip 3 or 4 times through the season. It does delay their blooming, but it also makes them play well with others, and we don't have time to stake. And then, we have to deal with a lot of resilience. We have to deal with what we call responding to a changing city, which is all of the development that's going on. And then climate has been an issue. We're seeing earlier and earlier bulbs emerging. And so we've had to think about the timing of the way we cut the garden back. And of course, the wind is an issue. And then we have reflected light off of these buildings. which can scorch some garden beds as well. We do add about 8,000 new plants every year. It's funny in New York on the East Coast, we have to get our plant lists in December for delivery in April, May, June. And so it's kind of important that you get them in so that you can kind of reserve them because they don't always grow everything. It's not like the ease of Los Angeles where you can just order anything you need any time of the year and hopefully it's available. We care for 1.6 miles of gardens, so the logistics do get tricky. Um, but I will tell you, riding a trike at sunrise on the High Line at 7 a.m., it's just an amazing experience. And you can see that, logistics are just often people powered. And I mentioned cut back. This is all of the perennials and grasses on the park need to be cut back. We do this in early March, sometimes late February. And we do this because A, it's great to leave everything up. It's visually interesting. And of course, we want to support birds with the seeds and hiding places for pollinators and such. But because we have a complex series of things like shrubs and we have the rail tracks running through, it's not like we can just bring in a bush mower. So it takes a village to get in and do a lot of this work by hand. It takes over 250 volunteers, almost an entire month. We do snow removal too as a horticulture team. There's been a lot of that already this year. And so here we are. This is my group from a few years back. But we do have 3 seasonals that join us in the summertime. We have a teen fellow program, and they're working with us in the summertime and getting workshops with us all through the year. They work with us after school. We do have a series of what we call Hort Partners, and those are volunteers that give us 3-hour shifts every week during the season. And some of them have been working with us for, gosh, I guess almost 17 years. And then the team has teams. We have a group that have self-selected from the horticulture team that work with trees and soil and our green waste recycling program, propagation, data management, IPM, and then working also with the education folks. So ecological benefits, I'm keeping talking and I'm not keeping track of time. I'm not sure what time I'm supposed to end, but
You're
someone
fine,
get the,
Richard.
thank you. Okay. Okay. I think we're on the home stretch, people. I think just a few more minutes, a few more slides. So I did mention the ecological benefits, of course, working with Carol at the Nature Gardens at the Natural History Museum in Los Angeles was an incredible experience with all of the scientists that were studying urban nature. So I was able to really bring that experience to the High Line. This is just a reminder that the High Line is just this ribbon of green running through the city. It's not a big, wide, giant garden. But we do have quite a few effects, and they're positive. We did a study with a group called Climate Central recently and discovered that the High Line is about 7 to 8 degrees cooler than the surrounding city. So all of that green, all of that oxygen transpiration, et cetera, is really helpful for people. And we do provide nature access to people. And so there is, I think, a lot of opportunity for the wellness of nature to occur. And of course, Doug Tallamy, in his book, Nature's Best Hope, came to the High Line. That's a picture of Rick Dark, the naturalist and author. And Doug called us an important connector between wild places. We get a number of birds that visit, and of course, butterflies. We've seen fewer butterflies, evidently. The more buildings, the harder it is for them to find us, but we still see monarchs every year. We were very excited a couple years ago to work with the New York City Wildflower Project, and we represented Manhattan and nominated butterfly milkweed as the plant that we thought should be the official wildflower of New York City. And lo and behold, we won the competition. So it's working its way through the city council and hopefully will be the official New York City wildflower.
Richard, I just have to interrupt. Can you go back to that image for a second? Are those
Yeah.
orange colored aphids on the
Yes.
orange flowered
Yes.
milkweed?
Yeah, those are they're oleander aphids, and I think they're maybe the same aphid that we get that you get in Southern
Could
California.
be
Yeah.
color coordinated.
Mm.
Thank you.
And of course, they're theoretically food, although we don't really see many predators on those aphids because they're getting the alkaloids from the milkweed. We did do a bee study with the American Museum of Natural History a few years back, and they identified 33 species of bees on the High Line using it for food and nesting, and 27 of those were native species. And we do see a variety of other things. In fact, I took this little crab spider picture with my iPhone. Um, so there's just a lot of life on the High Line. And we're really excited that because we have 6.5 million visitors, we get a chance to perhaps educate a few folks about what's going on. And so we do a horticulture celebration. Um, 2 years ago, we celebrated New York City native plants, of which we discovered we had 160 species out of the 560 species. 160 were known to be native to one of the five boroughs of New York City. So that was really fun. Last year in 2024, we honored Piet Oudolf and his contributions to the world of urban landscapes. Pete turned 80 that year and came and did a program for us, and was just really exciting to have this. And then in 2025, we opened Nature in the City, which was an exploration to urban ecology. They, I had to give a shout out to our communications team. They just get the best illustrators. This is Lily Kwan, I think, and she just does this beautiful work. And it was so successful. We have this passageway where we have these big interpretive panels that stay up, and people have a chance to kind of dive into the nature that the wonderful things the High Line provides. We have these plants signs on the right. There's 38 of those throughout the garden. And it's so successful, we're leaving it up through 2026 because it was so much work, frankly. It's nice just to take a winter off and not have to be worrying about all the content for the horticulture celebration. So we're so lucky to have Pete come and work with us. And when he comes, we do these walks and he meets with each horticulturalist in their zone and listens to their challenges and suggests some new plants and suggests way things should be pruned. And it's just been an honor to work with him. And this is a section of the garden I alluded to. There's that one Highline building I mentioned. This section was under construction for 9 years because the building went bankrupt during COVID, and they put those walkway sheds over the walkway to protect it. And of course, those have impacts. And anyway, long story short, this was a mess of weeds. And we just this past November got the entire soil replaced. And Pete did a brand new design for us, which is really exciting. We think this area is going to be called the Chelsea Terrace. And you can see on the right, here we were planting literally the third week in November because this project was delayed and there's a few more plants to come in. But we're really excited to finally get this area kind of cleaned up. Here you are. These are some of our oak trees. And if you look on the right, you can see some oak seedlings that popped up during those 9 years of construction, and we decided to leave them. I kind of figure if a seedling is popping up, it's chosen to be there, it's going to be hopefully a happy plant. So we will kind of extend our oak grove a little bit. And then the most exciting thing is the very, very north end of the park, the north end of the Western Rail Yard Preserve. Pete has designed a new entrance garden for us there. And it was a pinch me moment to do a site visit with him for the first time and see his kind of process. And he did, this is what it looks like. You can see many tourists come to this location and start the High Line here because it says, start of the High Line on the Google Maps. And it just doesn't look like the rest of the High Line. It's a little bit of self-seeded and some leftover plants were kind of tucked in. And so we're going to redo the walkways, the gate, and a new planting plan from Pete. And little idea of what it would look like. I love the fact that the landscape architects put a man bun. This is a real hipster here. But it's going to be a really kind of, you're going to come in and get really immersed in this garden. You'll put the bus stop on one side away and the parking lot on the other. Hopefully will get screened away. And because we will have all of these wonderful flowering shrubs, we're going to have a lot of fall berries, the elderberry, the viburnums. So we're really excited that this might be a nice place for birds to hang out. And then the perennials will come in some renderings. Of course, it'll be a great fall garden and a great spring garden. And there we go. We've completed our journey, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Thank you, Richard. That was awesome. Awesome. That was a lot to cover, but you did a great job. There are a few questions in the chat, and I'll go with those first, and then I have a few of my own. So,
Okay.
all right. So here's a question. Any problem with the original structure deteriorating? The ironwork, the wood, etc. It looks from the slides like some of the sides are newer.
Um, There are some additions. So the original railings are all intact. The beams are almost 6 feet wide and they're just incredibly robustly built. So they did get basically sandblasted, the lead paint removed. All the iron is painted. So it does need to get repainted. We are having some issues with some of the concrete spalling is falling, and that's kind of a water issue.
Hmm.
Um, we have a division called Planning, Design, and Construction. There's three, four people, architects, project managers, landscape architects, and they work literally, there's always a construction of something being renovated.
Yeah.
Right now, we're redoing walkways, I'm sorry, stairways. There's outdoor elevators that are constantly being redone. So it's just it's sometimes compared to being a skyscraper on its side, how complex the High Line is, because there's um, security cameras and lighting and irrigation, obviously, and just all sorts of mechanisms that are running underneath, and it just gets complex keeping everything happy.
Not surprising. Um, Another person is asking, how is the relationship with neighbors? I remember a lady whose windows faced the garden. Apparently, she was referred to as the burlesque lady,
Yeah, yeah,
who
yeah, yeah.
caused a bit of ruckus with the garden directors years ago.
So there were, that was a existing residential building that had a fire escape that was just 5 or 6 feet from the High Line. And the lighting on the High Line, it is lit and it's open in the summertime until 10 p.m. They've made most of the lighting was rail lighting and below. So they made the lighting very low so that the cityscape would be on display. And there a few trees had a few kind of uplights, and one of those uplights had gotten shifted and was shining directly on this woman's window. And
Hmm.
she took that as a spotlight, and she came out and she started doing shows, singing operas. And so it became a whole thing, and it morphed into this kind of performance art on the High Line. And I don't know whatever happened to it, but there are pictures of it in some of the books. So. The
Interesting.
relationship with the neighbors is generally pretty good, although, like, we don't allow recorded music, we don't allow amplified music. But somebody came up with a xylophone recently, and a lot of the neighbors complained. So it we have a group that works with the community, and it's a city. Everybody's got to get along. We do our best.
Okay. Um, do you still make seed bombs and sell them to the public?
Mm.
Apparently, you used to do that.
Yeah, in fact, so we're just restarting our retail. Um, we had retail before COVID. It kind of went away. We've just hired a new director. There's a bunch of new products coming. And one of the things he found in the retail closet were these seed bombs. Um, and we contacted the gentleman who made them. He's not in the same business anymore. And to be honest with you, I don't know where we're at with the seed bombs. I'm a little concerned seed bombs anymore and making sure that the species you're putting in them is appropriate for where you're throwing them. And but we are doing some Highline seed mixes, and so those will be available starting in April.
Cool. Yeah, I share your concern about the content of some seed bombs that have been, put together and somewhat indiscriminately made available. You
Yeah,
never know where they're going to end up and what potential escapees might come out of that. Here's a question about the equisetum. Was that actually part of the original planting scheme? I think you said it was.
Hmm. It was part of the peat scheme for the bog bed.
Okay.
Was it originally one of the highline plants? I'm not sure if it was one of the self-seeded. I wouldn't be surprised if there were some restios growing. I mean, we did see Phragmites
Oh, yeah.
from the original self-seeding. Um, we made the decision not to. In fact, we had, and Carol, you'll appreciate this from the pond at the Nature Gardens. We had cattail,
Oh,
typha.
yes.
And that started to get too aggressive and was just popping up 20 feet away from where it was supposed to be. So
Right.
we removed that. So it's weird to have a bog bed without cattail because it's just such an iconic plant, but just not worth the management issues.
Even the miniature one with self-seed? I've never grown it, but I wonder if it's
We
better
that's the one
behaved.
we were trying. It wasn't self-seeding so much as just aggressive rhizomes.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Have you ever tried planting any of wetland plants in leaving them in their container so that they can't
Yes, they
spread?
did that. They did it previously with a few things, but
Not anymore.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. Um, let's see. Is the Highline wheelchair accessible?
Yes. Yes, we have. So the entrance at 34th Street is at grade, and so that's accessible. The entrance at Hudson Yards is accessible, and then we have one, two, three. We have five elevators along the park, which are
Excellent.
consistently breaking, and we have a banner on our website for people that need to be conscious of accessibility and the elevators. It's one of the first things that we message is just as you start your journey, make sure that the elevators are working. It's amazing how many times they break down.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure that they had to have
Yeah,
accessibility as a public park. It would
yeah.
have been a legal requirement. How is the Highline funded?
Oh, such a good question. My gosh, there are people at the Highland that would kill me for not bringing this up. So we are officially a New York City park. One of the arrangements to make the Highline happen was to give the structure to the Parks Department, but we are 99% funded by the Conservancy Friends of the Highline, the nonprofit. And we are free to the public. Um, and all of our programming is free as well. So we sell out, we have members who, of course, don't get free admission, but they get other benefits. And we have donors and then corporate and foundation funds. We have a very robust fundraising team that does an amazing job. Our annual budget this year, I think, is about $21 million. So
Just for the horticulture?
no, 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 fish. No, what
You
would I do with,
wish.
no, what would I do with $21 million? The horticulture budget is about 2.1 million. So still really significant. And that's operating and obviously the biggest number in that is payroll.
Right, right. It always is, yeah. What type of irrigation system do you use?
Ah, well. My favorite subject. So funny story. When the Highline first opened, Pete said, "Well, it would be nice if the gardeners," and I have this tendency to impersonate him, and I have to stop doing that when because he's got such a wonderful voice. But he said, he said it would be so great. We'll just hand water, and then the gardeners will really have a chance to see the garden and spend time with it. Well, 18 inches of soil, 30 feet in the air in a New York, 90-degree summer, it just wasn't, I'd need 60 people. And so after 2 years, they retrofitted irrigation for the first section and then included it in the further sections. So it's a mix. It's primarily drip irrigation. There are some sprays and some MP rotators, and the lawn has rotors. But this 2 years after I started, it was time to really rethink the irrigation control system. So we brought in new controllers. We brought in soil moisture sensors that are tied to the system, and those give us real-time soil moisture data, and we can adjust. I don't trust the system to use the soil moisture sensors to automate yet, but we use that to kind of guide the schedule that we set. So we set like a minimum bare schedule, and then every horticulturist can operate spot, drip irrigation you can run at any time during the day. So if they see a bed that looks wet, they can just add time. And so we can do it really kind of targeted and really pay attention to what the plants need.
Okay. So each gardener, each horticulturist has direct responsibility for managing the irrigation in his or her section.
More or less, yeah. I mean, we run a base schedule, and then they can increase certain areas if they need it.
Okay. Okay, well, there are a lot more questions I'm going to have to pick and choose here. Somebody wants to know what your favorite section is, if you have one.
Oh, it's like children. You're not
All
supposed to have
right.
favorites. I would say the Gansevoort woodland because, and you'll know this, Carol. I mean, I grew up in Michigan and we had a cabin in the woods and it was, paper birches. And so the gray birches of the Gansevoort woodland section just remind me of my childhood. So I would say probably that's my favorite section.
Okay. Um, are dogs allowed?
No, no, it just, and of course we get quite a few
Sure.
service dogs.
Yes.
And I'm sure some of them really are service dogs, but and it hasn't been a problem. But you can imagine we get very like we will have a busy day for us, like Memorial Day is a busy day, and we'll get 40,000 people in the course of the day. So just having dogs on leashes and 8 feet wide pathway, and it's just wouldn't work. And then of course there's the other aspects, the urine and
Right.
stuff would just be too hard to manage. But
Right.
I wish.
Yeah. Well, maybe there could be some special event, a day for
I've been
dogs.
pushing for that and I have
Yeah.
not gotten any traction, but stay
Oh,
tuned.
all right.
Yeah.
Someone's asking about wind, wind throw. Have you lost many of the larger shrubs or trees because of wind tunnels?
Well, up at 30th Street, which is a wind tunnel, we had a juniper snap off recently. Um, but I'm amazed. When I first started, it kept me up at night. All of these trees, 30 feet tall. We have one river birch that kind of snuck into the gray birches, and it is probably 40 feet tall. And we
Wow.
keep it very thinned out to reduce the kind of sail, so it has
Mhm.
very little friction against the wind. Um, but everything seems to be resiliently holding. For the most part, we have not had there have been a few, and then when they put up these construction sheds and they change the wind patterns, that's when you'll actually get things that snap because it's not the way they built up their resistance wood, and
Right. Right.
we'll
Yeah.
get some damage then.
But amazingly, not very many trees have had to be
No,
replaced for that reason. Okay.
but one of the things I'm trying to figure out, and I'm got a expert coming to walk with me, is how long can you grow gray birches in 30 and 18 inches of soil 30 feet in the air? What is they're not,
Hmm.
they're a pioneer species. They don't live long.
Right.
So and then what does that look like? I mean, we've put in a few small birches last year, just kind of trying to anticipate, but the soil is just going to get so clogged. We're trying to figure out at what point we need to think about just replanting a section and how do you pay for that?
So here's a question that ties into a talk that we're going to have. I can't remember when, but it's coming up, um, about, retaining
Mm,
dead, dying, or declining trees because of the habitat value that they present, assuming they
yes.
don't present a risk hazard. So do you ever give that some consideration on the Highline?
We we certainly give it consideration because we're a big believer in snags being good habitat. However, um, there are safety issues with that.
Hmm.
And there's also aesthetic issues. So what we have a tendency to do is where we can, in some sections, we will bring trees down and leave them in the back. And there's some beds. where they've kind of been sloped. We call them berm beds,
Hmm.
and there can be erosion issues. So we'll kind of tow a tree into the backside of that, and it can become, habitat as it decomposes.
Right. A stumpery kind of thing.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I have a question. I'm just going to interject here. You mentioned structural soil. That's what you use on the
Mm,
Highliner. So two part. Are there
hmm
different compositions of the structural soil depending on what the plant community is? And would you define
Ugh.
or tell us what the components of these structural soils are?
Yeah, so it is just basically a mix of um, humus, and compost. Sand, what's the word I want? Not humus, but
Um,
soil,
okay.
topsoil.
So
Yeah.
topsoil. Okay.
So it's just and then they do even in 18 inches, they'll do a gradation. So more sand at the bottom, more of a mix, and then a heavier compost at the top.
And
And
you're
it's
adding
and
compost
it
occasionally. You top dress
and
occasionally.
right. Our big additive is compost. We take all of our green waste and we generate 300, and we just looked at this number today. That's why I know 360 cubic yards of green waste every year. And we take that to one of our compost partners and they shred it and turn it into compost. And we pick up the compost when we drop off the green waste. And they make a pretty good compost. It's not super active, but it's working.
Well, you've got an awful lot of biology up there already. So,
And do you know what's interesting? We don't do any fertility additives to the grasslands
well,
in ever. And I think the pollution in the air has a certain amount of nitrogen,
exactly. You're
the
getting some
rain.
deposition. Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
And it's interesting how just, basically sandy soil with a gravel mulch and everything seems to be so far so good in the grasslands.
Well, there's nutrient recycling in the soil going on when all the roots are
Yeah,
slipping off.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yep.
Um, on the Q&A side here, we have a question, just a quick one. Wanted to know what the three sumac species were.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So Rus typhina, staghorn sumac, Rus glabra, which I think is smooth
Smooth
sumac.
sumac.
Yep.
Yep.
And Rus copalina, which is winged sumac.
Okay, and is there a plant list available anywhere?
Oh, that is the million-dollar question. So if you Google Highline plant list, there is a sad PDF plant list on the Highline website that will come up from 2017, and it's sort of correct. We
Okay.
are working. In fact, I was in a meeting today. We're working very hard. We're launching a new website next spring in 27, and we will have a really good searchable, interactive with images website. I'm embarrassed to say that it's like if you want many of the Highline plants are the same plants at the Lurie Garden. The Lurie Garden has a fabulous plant list with images and cross-reference, and it's everything we would hope to have. And so I would send you there if you really want to get some great information and great photos.
Great, that's really helpful. Somebody asked, was the same design mandate employed for the hardscape selections? In other words, native masonry for paving, and North American hardwoods for benches.
No.
Okay, fair enough.
But I love that idea. We're backing our way into more sustainability. I'll tell you that we just did a renovation project in an area that had wooden Ipe decking. And the Parks Department said, oh, well, you can't use, um, we needed just a small section to be replaced. And they said, well, you have to find reclaimed Ipe. There was no reclaimed Ipe anywhere in the US, so we had to go to India for it. Then a little thing happened called tariffs. And so that project was delayed an entire year, just trying to get 8 square feet of reclaimed Ipe from India. So we're trying to be more sustainable now, but
Yeah, and on the topic of sustainability, somebody's wondering if the project could have been done using only natives from New York State. And I
Um,
think it might have been.
it could. I'll give you Pete's philosophy on natives. He says gardens are for people. And so I want the ability to make the most interesting garden I can make. And that includes using, and he says well behaved. Of course, I think one of the issues is we don't always know they're well behaved when we use them. Sometimes they can be well behaved and sleep along, and then 8 or 10 years on, they've figured out how to suddenly, start to make viable seed, etc. Um, but the Highline is 55% native by species count, but by biomass, it's like 70 or 80% native because the trees and the large shrubs and things like that are, and the majority of many of the matrix grasses like Sporobolus, et cetera, are natives.
And I think you
There-
gave us a percentage of natives now, or you said 160 species native to New York.
That's just the New York list, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
There isn't just one section though that's exclusively Eastern native, is there? Or is there? Almost?
Ish.
Ish? Okay.
The Moynihan connector has a couple of species that aren't native, but most of it is Northeast natives.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Somebody's asking a non-horticultural question I'm going to throw in about the rail lines. Where did that go? Is there an old original engine or train car anywhere on the High Line?
Oh, I saw that question. No, but I will tease you that we had a program meeting last fall talking about what our big kind of topics for 2027 might be, and somebody brought up the fact that it would be good to talk about trains, and
Yeah,
so um, I'm not sure we're going to be bringing a whole locomotive back up, but we'll see. We'll see. It's on our minds. It's a good idea.
yeah. Well, there was one other one here I wanted to. Oh, yes. How involved are the original founders, if at all?
Um, Robbie and Josh are still live in Manhattan. Josh lives around the corner. Um, they are they are more used for fundraising consulting at this point. They got a lot of connections and they help with that sort of thing and maybe doing some press and being available for interviews and stuff like that. But for the most part, the day-to-day stuff, not at all.
Okay. Well, I think that does it pretty much for the questions that I had. Laura, did you get through yours?
A couple more on the Q&A. I think we have an arborist in the audience.
Hmm.
A lot of questions about trees regarding your birches. Most of them are 3-stem. I saw that you removed some stems, and I observed that you didn't source multi-stem trees in the new section. Any comments?
In the new section. So we do have the birches were all multi-stem. They were all the same age. We brought in some younger birches that were multi-stems. I'm trying to think. We did put some birches up at 30th Street recently that I thought were multis, but maybe not. Um, it's the birches are, and I know that someone had made a comment. Maybe it's Kunyu who pointed out, I think sent me a note at one point about our turkey tail mushrooms, which are Ganoderma. And so there's a couple birches that have now been removed because they've got this opportunistic fungus. So that is one of the things that I'm hoping it was opportunistic and not pathogenic, but I'm not sure we'll be putting a birch right back in that spot.
Yeah. And one more question from the Q&A. Have you done an extended structural study? I guess probably on the soil and weight of the trees and bio.
Yeah, so trees, we don't worry about weight because 2 freight trains weighed more than anything we could possibly create in the garden. I will tell you a story that I was really worried about, trees blowing over and just I was hiking shortly after I started the Highline, probably in the fall of 2022, up in the Appalachian Trail, and there had been a windstorm and these mature trees had blown over. And lo and behold, because of all the glacier ledge rock, the entire forest was growing in just 18 inches of soil. And it made me think, Mother Nature has figured this out. It can create an entire forest with these mature trees growing in 18 inches of soil. I can be a little less concerned about the highline where we're able to manage against, pathogens and, proper moisture and pruning and that sort of thing. So that made me feel a little happier.
Right. I think other than a few little tiny questions, I assume the best time to go admire your magnolia blooms would be in spring.
Yes, we have Magnolia virginiana, which is May, June. And then we have the Magnolia macrocarpa, which are, I think, a little right about the same time. And those are hard to miss,
Giant
12,
leaves. Yep.
12, 15 inches blooms too.
Yeah.
All right. And do you have is there any place that if people have other burning questions, they can reach you later? Or
Sure. I have my email is available, richard.hayden@thehighline.org. I think I had a slide with that, but it's gone away. But feel free to reach out. I'm happy to answer more questions.
great.
There is one more, Richard.
Yes.
And I know you will guffaw at this one. Favorite year-round plant combination.
Oh, right.
I didn't want to ask it because that's so hard, but
Favorite year-round plant combination. Well, it's funny. In fact, I think it will be on my Instagram tomorrow, which, by the way, you can find me at Nature Gardener on Instagram. Um, the in the Washington grasslands, there's a combination of Amsonia hubrechtii and Echinacea purpurea and Eryngium yuccifolium
mhm.
and oh, come on. You were doing so good, Richard. Nepeta, Calamintha nepeta,
Oh, okay.
which I wouldn't have thought would be a good winter interest. But and there is a sterile variety too that we have that I don't know that that's on the website, but that's a good one to have. It's a great matrix plant. It does spread, but it's low. It blooms for a long time. The bees love it. And it's just a great thing to have other perennials kind of emerging up out of.
Hmm. I thought you were going to have a pycnanthemum in there after the one
I
you saw.
I would actually. That's a good one.
Yeah, yeah,
Pycnanthemum muticum,
yeah.
mountain mint.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I don't like to use the word aggressive, but opportunistic is the word I would use.
Yeah.
If there's an empty space, it will fill it.
It will fill it.
Yeah.
Well, this has
I've
been
also
awesome.
really been into, I would just give a shout out for Culver's root, Veronicastrum virginicum.
Mm-hmm.
Great texture, great tall spires, great winter
There's a lot of
interest.
those plants you're talking about we can't successfully grow here, but a few of them here and there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Those cold winters. Right.
Well, we'll just hang out in our succulent gardens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody asked if you miss California at all.
Absolutely. It's so funny. I was in San Francisco last September doing a talk for Western Horticulture, your sister organization, and I spent some time with Richard Turner touring the tunnel tops, and I couldn't remember the name of the plant. I was losing the, so I can't remember the name of the California natives, and I'm still learning everything on this coast. I feel like I'm in horticultural nomenclature purgatory.
Yeah. It would come back to you when you come back.
Yeah.
And hopefully you will at some point.
Yes,
Yes.
soon. I'm not sure I'll end up here forever because there's this thing called winter, and
Yep. Yep.
yeah,
The bear.
it's an acquired taste.
All
Well,
right.
we
Well,
should let you go so you can get some shut eye before you're back at the grind tomorrow. This has been fabulous. Thank you, Richard.
Well, it's been a lot of fun. Thanks for having me, everybody.